Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. All things Middle-earth here with a video on whether or not you should play Season 6, the Rings of Power, Kings of Men season in the Rise to War. A lot of content creators, including myself, made plenty of videos on speculation for Season 6. When information came out, we got new information almost every day at times, revealing parts of the campaign to us. And so it was a lot of speculation type stuff. This is what we think the Kingdom feature will look like. This is what we think, choosing a spot to spawn on the map will look like, and so on and so forth. But there aren't as many videos covering actual after-season experiences, so I wanted to put together some of my thoughts, some pros and cons, if you will, after my experience having played through a season. You can make the most informed decision for yourself if you're considering Season 6 as an option for your future in the Rise to War. So stay tuned. All that information on Season 6 coming up in just 1 second. Okay, so starting out, we're going to start with the positives, the things that I really enjoyed about the season. And this shouldn't go with it being a huge surprise, but one of the things I enjoyed the most was the actual kingdom feature in the game. Again, if you aren't aware, for this 6th season, there are 8 rings of power on the map. And if your fellowship claims a ring of power, you can then form a kingdom that can house up to 5 fellowships. That number has now been adjusted to 3 fellowships, but at the time of myself having played, it's 5 fellowships per kingdom. And I really enjoyed that feature because I think being in a kingdom, it's a little bit more organized, if you will, than just being in a faction with 300 plus other people. If you're going into a kingdom, it's actually a decision made by players to get into a active fellowship and then join and be a part of and communicate with a kingdom. So it's a different layer of organization, in my opinion, as opposed to just playing with other fellowships in your faction or just random players in small groups. So the organization, the communication, those kind of things, the lack of spying, because if you play any other season where there are factions, players can put random alt accounts in your faction and technically spy on you and see what marches you have incoming, check faction chat, that kind of stuff, which happens quite often, unfortunately. So in Season 6, this is a season of probably the least amount of that spying and that kind of stuff happening. So just the added organization and structure, to me, the Kingdom feature really improved the overall quality of the game. And I think the change from 500 to 300 per kingdom is a fantastic one, because we'll get to it when we talk about the cons, but I do think the size of kingdoms needed to change to allow this game mode to be even more enjoyable. But overall, the general kingdom structure and what that brought to the game in comparison to factions was a huge win for me. Something else I really enjoyed about the season was the unit conversion ability. Obviously, the Ring has had some recent changes if you're staying up to date with things going on. Not that recent, but one of the most recent updates for it has included the conversion ability, which allows you to select mobs near your settlement and convert them for 10 ability points, which really allows you to get units that you would not normally have access to. So again, by my settlement where we are, I've got Swan Knights and Ravagers as the tier 4 available. Now, Swan Knights are available as one of the conscriptable units, so that one's not as important to me. But in certain areas, there are different types all over the place. So usually you're restricted by playing certain factions to get certain units, and I think this conversion mode allows you to have a little bit more flexibility, which I find very, very interesting. The unit conversion feature, again, if you click on them, you click ring, you have conversion for 10 points. It then puts them in your settlement, and you immediately have those troops available for you. So just the added versatility of that being a way to convert units is something I really, really enjoyed and would like to see in every other season if possible. But that was a huge enjoyment for me in this season. Something else I enjoyed was the flexibility you have when starting in your season. So if you usually play any other season, you start in a certain faction, which means when you start in a faction, so if you choose Arnor, for example, you're going to start around this area on the map. If you choose Linden, which is the Grey Havens right here, you're going to start around that area. Choose Isengard or Thank in this area, you get the picture. So your starting area on the map is determined by what faction you play as. So I think it limits players a little bit more in terms of what commanders they can run and what neutral camps are around, especially with the conversion of units. And this one adds another layer of choices. But in Season 6, you don't choose a faction because there are no factions. It's just kingdoms. So when the season starts, it loads you in and you just get to pick what region you want to spawn in. Originally, it was what zones within a region, but now it's just regions. And there are some restrictions, but for the most part, you can spawn pretty much anywhere on the map other than areas that house a Ring of Power or around the One Ring at Dol Guldur. But to me, the flexibility to be able to play anywhere you want on the map around certain neutral camps, around certain units that you could convert, around certain structures that give certain bonuses, and still not have to be locked into a certain faction you might not enjoy was a huge, huge plus. So again, not everyone might like that, because for me, it means you have to do more planning, or whether you get to. I enjoy that kind of stuff where I get to go through and think of why I feel like, for example, around Arnor, we felt like was a very good area based on the neutral units there, based on the hireable, the mobs that you can convert there, things like that. The actual structures around here were very good as well. So it adds a layer for those interested in, and that I really appreciated and enjoyed about this season. Now let's talk about some things that I did not enjoy so much. So again, with there being no factions, that means there are no, different sets of starting troops. Everyone has the same troops in their barracks. It is the men and evil men. So as you can see here, we just have the Eastern quarters and the Numenorian quarters, because the whole theme or lore of this season is that you're all Numenorian descendants that are good and evil, and so you have men and evil men available, and that's it. Everything else that you have has to be done throughout the hireable queues, or the different camps that you can build. So if I click build here on a tile, you can see we can go through and do every other type of unit, including some of the neutral camps that you can build if you capture certain regions. So you have 2 sets of units in men and evil men on your conscription queue, and everything else is in your hiring queue. And to me, this was a huge negative. It puts a very big pressure on the different types of units you can use, the different types of commanders you can use. Because again, if I go to conscript, you'll see you have one there. Keep going. All these ones that say requires hire are unavailable too. So you only have your 4 queues still, even if there's way more that you'd be doing through that queue. I only have my 4 queues down here that are right behind me. But again, you get the idea. It's very heavy on the hiring queue as opposed to the conscription queue. So I would personally like if they would adjust this somehow and make this to where there's still 4 here. Maybe it's still something that goes with the campaign theme, but it's not as restrictive in terms of having to really focus your roster. Because if you don't use commanders that use evil men, for example, or men, you're going to have a huge bottleneck in terms of your queues just being cut in half, basically. So that's not something I enjoyed, and I would like to see adjusted slightly. I get the theme they came from, but I would personally enjoy a wider variety of options with the conscription queues. Now, this point was addressed a little bit in the pros. I mentioned the kingdom size, and this con here is that the kingdom size is too big for the current server population. So what I mean by that is currently in my server, which is not the case anymore, but currently in my server, kingdoms can house 5 fellowships. And what I found on our server and many others were usually there was not more than 5 really active fellowships. Ours was a unique one where until right now it looks like it's very one-sided, but if you've been watching the streams, you know that this thing, while it was active, was very much half and half, but it was still just a 1v1 because there was about 10 active groups. So when the kingdom size is so large and there aren't more than, let's say, 10 groups, it's still a 1v1 like a teeter-totter. So at some point, one team's going to start winning, and that's just going to continue going that way further and further and further. So if they reduce, which they did, the kingdom size to 300, for example, now this server has closer to possibly 4 kingdoms. So whatever the number is, I think 300 is a good start. They just need to make sure they have a small enough kingdom number to add a variety of kingdoms based on their server population. Because I don't know how many they can put in a server. My speculation is that their servers do not allow for as many players as that would need to be in a server to actually have enough players to have 5 or 6 kingdoms with 500 people in them. I think the servers probably can't handle that. That's just speculation. So whatever it needs to be, if it's 250, if it's 300, if it's whatever it is, as long as they have enough players in the server to make it. So I think 5 would be a sweet spot. So it's not an even just 2v2. There's an odd number. So it's an added, variability of how things are going to play out. Or is it going to be a 3v2? Or are they going to be, 2v2 in a solo? I don't know, but I think it adds some variety. So that's something moving forward. I'll be interested to see how the new seasons progress with this, with 300. And hopefully we see 3 or 4 or even more active kingdoms and servers. Because I think that was the only main issue, was the balance was very, very off because there were not more than 5 active groups, and a lot of times the powerful groups just teamed up. So that was a huge issue, but I would love to see that addressed. It has been a little bit, but I'd love to see that actually worked. And if that doesn't work, they need to adjust it even more. But truth be told, if there's a whole nother round of seasons that are one-sided, people aren't going to play season 6 anymore. So I really hope they hit the nail on it with 300 and they actually put the appropriate amount of people in the servers. Something else I'd like to change, I touched on very briefly, was the hiring queue versus conscription queue problem. I think there needs to be more conscription queues to balance out those 2 queues. But in addition to that, whether or not they do actually do that, I think it'd be interesting if they actually rotated the faction troops that were available for conscription. So right now it's men and evil men, as you can see here. But if that changed and went to being dwarves and Uruk-hai, for example, and then these troops shifted to being available from the hiring queue if you build the appropriate barracks, I think that'd be very, very interesting. It would be, again, if they decide to keep it at 2, just the good and evil, I think it adds a little bit more flexibility. With that as well, on that same note, and changing like the highlighted faction to the highlighted troops. Right now, every single Ring of Power are these men-themed kingdoms. Like the Orthanc was built by the Numenorians. You have Dol Amroth. You have, you get the idea. They're all men kingdoms. So if they change it to, say, elves as it, then you could have some of the elven capitals like Rivendell up here be one of the Rings of Power. Or if it's dwarven, it could be Moria being one of the Rings of Power. So I think it changes the dynamic on the map a little bit more as well if we change what the main unit's focus is. Instead of being men and evil men are really all men, if it's something else like dwarves or elves or orcs, whatever it is, there's more variety each season. And that's a small enough change that, like, mechanically you don't have to change everything, but just switching out what's available means players don't feel like they're doing the exact same thing over and over again, because that is one of my cons when thinking about playing this season, is just that it'd be the exact same thing. Men and evil men, everything's hireable. It really puts a strain on the barracks. It's a bit much. So I'd really like to see some adjustment in terms of the amount of conscription queues and the variety we see there available. Now, having covered some pros and cons, I want to note one thing if it wasn't obvious before. This is a non-roleplay mode. It doesn't mean, that you choose between non-roleplay or roleplay. Their only option is non-roleplay because you have the men and evil men available. So if you are roleplay only, to me personally, that doesn't negatively impact me, but I understand people don't like non-roleplay. So if you are very set in a roleplay, there's no roleplay option for this season. Again, if you're thinking about it based on your performance and thinking you're only going to have good or evil troops, in my opinion, that's not a huge deal. Because if you're one or the other, you're just going to have better of one or the other instead of having spread between good and evil, which is what I've done. If you have really, really good commanders or really, really good evil commanders, to me, that balances out well enough. So if it's a thought on like the performance or keeping up or something like that, I don't personally think it's an issue, but that's just my preference. I know a lot of people just don't like non-role play because it's not lore accurate to see Gandalf the Grey running around with trolls. I get it. I feel that just from the content standpoint, it makes more sense for me. But I wanted to make sure that was clear as well. If you're considering this season, this is a non-roleplay mode. You cannot play a roleplay only mode with this season. And I don't see a way for that to change based on the current structure of things. Again, maybe they make it so the conscription queues are just two good camps, but then we're just getting closer and closer to it just being a faction thing. But again, I'm a huge fan of the Kingdom feature, so even if they had other game modes that were faction-based that implemented the Kingdom feature, I wouldn't be opposed because I like the Kingdom setup, but just want to make it clear that this is a non-roleplay mode. And to wrap things up, I do want to make a note on something I'd like to see in the future. We've been making comments throughout, but one big thing that I think would be very interesting is obviously there's a winning kingdom at the end of each of these seasons. In this example, I was thankful that it was ours in this one. But another game that mechanically is similar to this is a game called Rise of Kingdoms, which I'm not an expert on, so I apologize if I botched some of the ideas of how things work. But it is a very successful game, and I don't think it's foolish for the developers of Rise to War to consider looking at other games that they are kind of moving towards mechanically in terms of the Kingdom feature, to see what they're doing. And one thing that I've heard very, very good things about that people like in that game is a kingdom versus kingdom mode where you basically start, and this is a summary, so don't kill me for this, but you basically start in a map like this. This would be your home kingdom, and you fight, individually, smaller groups. And at the end of it, whoever wins is basically your king and leading this whole home kingdom as a whole. And then your whole kingdom will go and fight another kingdom. So another whole map, another whole server that has kind of gone through the fire together and shuffled out to see where people are at. Those players then fight each other on a new map. Now, again, I don't know all the details. That's just based on my conversations with EQ, having played before and explaining it to me. But I do think some kind of a future look at a kingdom versus kingdom mode would make sense to me. Again, it's, from what I can tell, one of the most popular game modes in Rise of Kingdoms, a very, very popular mobile game. So I think it'd be cool if the devs explored options where our kingdom won here, and so are there ways that our kingdom could then sign up to be put into a KVK with another kingdom that won another server to have a very competitive 1v1 or even possible multiple kingdoms. I don't know what it would look like, but to me, that'd be a future idea. That'd be very interesting to explore with this mode that I could see making players very interested in playing that. But again, those are my thoughts on Season 6. We covered some things I liked, some things I would change, some things to note, and things I'd like to see in the future, a future idea with the KVK idea. But I wanted to provide some information on just my recap of thoughts after playing and less speculation, which is what we've done so far on the channel. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Let me know down in the comments if you did, and I'll continue to look at making more content like this where we recap seasons. The players that haven't played them have a better idea. And it's not just all based on the early, before the season comes out, speculation type stuff that we originally did. So let me know if you enjoyed the video. I appreciate everyone watching, and as always, I'll see you in a future video.